And welcome back. Wanted to add a little bit to the beginning of this video to state, as I always do with this type of work, is that we're still dealing with the aspects of the fuel system. So in doing so, make sure you're taking appropriate precautions and you're ready in the event of emergency. Hopefully you never have one, but have items at the ready and off to the side. You don't see it in my videos, but we do have fire extinguishers and other appropriate items at the ready in case something should go sideways. But with that being said, what you're going to see in this video is that we complete the replacement of the fuel pump and the vapor canister on the gas tank and get it remounted and get everything plumbed back in. We finished that off by adding about 7 to 8 gallons of nice fresh gasoline to the tank. Now, prior to installing the tank, I should say, you'll see it in the video, but we did run some compressed air from the fuel from the connection point at the fuel rail down and blew what was left of the old fuel out of the line running up. And you'll hear me comment it in video, but what came out of that line pretty much smelled like furniture varnish. Now you'll see in the video that it did help our pressure problems. Now, as the engine was running, I have seen closer to 58 psi at that rail using our fuel gauge. So it has fixed the issue, and we had to drop the tank and replace the pump and do the cleanup. If for anything, just the sugar that we found in the tank. So that's been taken care of. It was work that had to be done, and the reason why I'm saying that is that even with the pump being done and fixing the fuel pressure problem, as well as you'll also see in the video, we pulled all the injectors out and made sure there was no built-up crud on the top part of the injector where the filter normally sits. And in one of the injectors, you'll see in the video that was just crammed full of sugar crystals. So at least that injector we actually did replace. Now, we replaced it with an aftermarket one, but we did replace it. So we went through and cleaned the injectors, buttoned everything up, and for the first startup after that, it actually started and idled fine on its own. And then as the idle was coming down, it started to run rough again and it started its normal multiple misfire. And since that point, it kind of reverted back to what it was doing before, where you can start it and it'll stay running, but only if you kind of give it a little bit of gas pedal to go along with it, and it'll stay running. Now, from my research and limited experience on it, from what I can find, that is indicative of what it sounds like, at least a vacuum leak. It can be caused by several other things other than a vacuum leak. But it could be a broken valve spring in one of the cylinders. It could still be a dead cylinder throwing everything out of whack. I actually just watched a video in which a single broken valve spring in just one cylinder exhibited the exact same symptoms we're seeing on the truck out there. Again, I'm not saying that's what it is, but the symptoms that we're having can be caused by, unfortunately, a great number of things. So at this point in time, we're still tracing down any potential, how should I say, sabotage, as you might want to call it that. Again, just from finding sugar in the tank, who knows at this point what else has been done to this poor engine. So the only thing we can do is continue to diagnose this and continue on from there. So when it does run and you're giving it fuel manually, you can smell it coming out of the exhaust. So it's running really rich. You can also see the O2 sensors starting to pull fuel out. So you can smell it. The O2 sensors reflect it. So the ECU is trying to pull fuel out of the mix to account for that. And I think what's happening is it's pulling enough fuel out of the mix that it's potentially causing the cylinders to go lean and thus misfire. But again, we're going to have to get the scan tool on it at this point, graph out our O2s, graph out our now I already looked at the map sensor on it, and I'm seeing map sensor voltage, and I see that voltage vary as the engine's running. We need to trace down any potential vacuum leaks that we may have, things of that nature. I guess a long way of saying that We're still going to have to now continue the troubleshooting process now that we know that we have the fuel pressure problem squared away. Now, with that being said, you'll hear me make a comment in the video, and you'll see a tail end of a red 1500, which is a 2012, which has the same 5.7 liter Hemi. Now, since we found one fuel injector crammed full of sugar, that makes, at least in my mind, the fuel injectors that haven't been replaced up to this point. So we've replaced 2 of the 8, so that leaves 6 more, which are potentially subject to having a problem. Now, I did loosen up the fuel rail, picked it up off the intake, and had the key cycled a good 3 or 4 times to build pressure back up in the rail, and I don't see the injectors leaking. So it doesn't look like they're in a situation where they're stuck open. But that doesn't mean they're still not having a potential mechanical issue with those injectors. So what I may do is a quick test, because it's easy enough to pull it. We may pull the fuel rail and all of its injectors off the red 1500, since we know that engine starts and runs fine. It's a known good. And put it onto the TRX, because the replacement part number for the injector is the same for the 2009 as it is the 2012 that we have. So we can put that entire fuel rail and all of its injectors on the gray one out there, and give it a crank and see if it helps our issue, or if our issue stays the same. If it stays the same, we know we're not chasing a fuel issue anymore at that point. And then we'll have to continue troubleshooting and go on from there. So it's just a long-winded way. I just wanted to say kind of what the steps are going forward. And with this all being said, I'll revert you to the video at this point, and then I'll bring you back for the next video, which I believe will be just kind of swapping out that fuel rail, because it's easy enough to do. It'll be something we can check off the list, and then we'll go on from there. But with that being said, I do appreciate it. Thank you much. Bye.
And welcome back. So in the last video, we put the new fuel pump inside the fuel tank and the new vapor canister. Today we're going to attempt to get that fuel tank reinstalled. But what we've done here, what we're getting ready to do is, you can see that we've got our fuel line disconnected from our fitting, and we're just going to take a little bit of shop air and blow some air through that line, and just basically purge it of any residual fuel, any of that bad fuel that may still be in the line, as well as potentially, blow any other crud that may be in that line, hopefully out. The line itself seems fine underneath the truck. There's no rust spots on it, nothing that would look like it would warrant, replacing that entire lines. I had that suggestion sent to me, and it's actually an excellent suggestion, but it looks like this truck in its previous life wasn't in an area where they used a lot of salt or things of that nature on the road, so it's actually pretty corrosion free underneath. So again, what we're going to do is going to just run some shop air through that line, finish blowing that line out, and then we'll get the tank reinstalled. Once that's done, then we'll more than likely pull this fuel rail back off again, and just make sure these injectors are good and clean. We'll dump any residual fuel on the rail out before we attempt to put fresh fuel in it, and then see if it helps our starting situation. I'm going to go ahead and take care of this, and I'll bring it back. I'm only using about 50 psi through that line right now, and the tank is still outside the vehicle, disconnected, so that fuel line is actually just open underneath the truck right now. And if that metal line can handle 60 psi worth of fuel, it should be able to handle 50 psi worth of air without an issue. That being said, I'll let you go and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So we're still in the process of prepping our tank to put it back in. And if you remember last time, we had this lovely locking gas cap, which probably the previous owner or somebody put it on here, but either way, we don't have the key. There's several videos online that show these are easily defeated, and this is just one such method. You can see that we got a small wood screw, and kind of close to the center, just manually drove it in a little bit. And again, I'm only doing this because we got the tank dropped out of the way. So whatever you're going to do this with, don't use an electric screwdriver or anything that may cause a spark. But we've driven this wood screw in probably about a good 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch, and then supposedly what that will do is lock the top cap that would normally spin without the key with the bottom assembly and allow you to spin it out. So with this screw in there, we should now just be able to turn this, and that'll keep the top from spinning. And there you go, undefeated locking gas cap. So I would have to say that if you need a locking gas cap, then you probably want to get a metal one. Otherwise, these plastic ones are, as you can see here, pretty easily defeated. And if we back this screw out, we should be able to get this thing to spin freely again. Let's see here. We back that. See, and that's just it doesn't have to be a wood screw that long. It's just easier to get to it from outside the filler neck to drive it in. And you'll see by looking at that, the top spins freely without the key. So by putting that screw in there, you're locking that top cap assembly with the bottom assembly, which again, did the job, got the cap out. Now we just have to replace the cap. We're going to continue working on getting this fuel tank remounted, and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see we're just getting our line situated. We've got our our tank vent line reattached. And so far that epoxy fitting is holding. You can see everything snapped in place, locked in place fine. That looks like that's the appropriate angle. It comes out at an angle, turns a little bit more, slight, probably about a 45 elbow, and then eventually comes out to where it'll hook up to the filler neck. This is our new line, as you can see here, that goes from our filler neck down to our tank. In case you're curious on this one, the bigger shoulder, you notice how that one just has a little bit of a shoulder to it, but this one has a much wider shoulder. The wider shoulder end goes to the tank end, and this small, like, kind of just bubble out, you want to call it, or crease out, this end that goes in the filler neck. We've got our line reattached for our vent for our vapor canister. We've got our fuel line reattached and our clip reinserted, and went ahead and put our cover back on because that's going to need to be there before we hook up our electrical. So we'll get that sort of situated. As far as getting the tank underneath, we're going to do the same thing we did when we removed it. We're going to have to jack the truck up a couple inches, slide the tank underneath, and then slide it rearward to get it into position. And then once it's in that position, then we'll have to see about getting it up on a jack stand to support it, so we can slowly raise it into the position, at least until we can get the tank straps on it. And then it's just a matter of making all the necessary connections. The one connection that might be a bear, because it's just hard to get to once this tank's at a high enough level to connect it, is going to be the electrical connection of a fuel pump. Yeah, I'll try to show it to you, but you just kind of have to do that one by feel, unfortunately. But we're getting it together, and let's see what else. Oh, one thing on this vent line that Scott Rods made a very good comment on this, was that in order to install this tank and not put excess pressure on this line, one thing that we could do is, you know, maybe come down to about here or right here where this long straight piece is before it goes into the filler neck, kind of cut this line and get a double barbed fitting, and then kind of reassemble the line. And that would take the, you know, us from inadvertently hitting this or kind of happen to bend it to get around the frame, because these two lines here, I should say these three lines here, have to come up and over top of the frame rail to hook back into the filler neck. So as fate would have it, when I was at the parts store the other day, I forgot to get a barbed fitting. So I'm going to take my chances on this one, and like I said, when I put this on there, it's a pretty solid fit, and it didn't phase that connector. So we're just going to hope and pray when we put this tank back up in there that we don't break that piece off again. With that being said, we're going to work on getting this tank underneath, and I'll bring it back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see we got our tank reinstalled, straps, lines, electrical connections. I didn't film a lot of it because it's just going to be too difficult to get a camera down in here, because we had two individuals working kind of in tandem to get this tank where it needed to be. It's not a difficult job to do with it laying on the ground, but to get the tank underneath, we did like we did for removal. We jacked the truck up an extra couple inches to get it, the parts on the bottom of the tank to clear this frame rail. got the tank slid in position, slid it backwards, and then put the front strap on, hooked it into the frame rail where it hooks, because remember it's kind of a hook type that, and because the only bolt that holds it is the one in front. Got it to hook so it would kind of partially hold the tank, got the front and rear at least hooked to the frame rail, left it unbolted, left it just kind of hanging here, and that gave enough room to get to the top of the tank and put in the electrical connector for the fuel pump. Once we had the electrical connector for the fuel pump, then we just kind of rotated and pushed the rest of the tank up in the position until we can get a couple threads on each one of these bolts to hold it there. Once that was done, we got our evap line reattached and our fuel line reattached here at the frame rail, and then just went ahead and tightened up the fittings. And then we made the fittings for the filler neck and the vent tube for the vapor canister, which I'll show you that here in a second. Like I said, it's not a difficult job, it's just cumbersome. This tank is not very heavy, it's just dealing with it and getting it between the frame rail and the drive shaft and kind of getting everything together and then rolling it all in place. Like I said, it's doable, definitely doable with two people, but you will need the help of a second person, or at least a set of jack stands if you're going to attempt to do this on your own. And sad to say, I have to report that our glued on vent fitting did not hold. It did not break due to us putting it into the truck. When I was sliding underneath the truck and I noticed it had a little bit of a wobble to it. So it looks like it actually broke just from the force of pushing that fitting back in place. And when I looked at the edge of the connector that broke, the spot we glued, the glue was still gummy. So it actually didn't set up. So it doesn't look like that particular version of JB Plastic Weld is going to be good for that type of plastic that's on that fitting. But like we said before, no harm, no foul. The tank will still vent. It's just going to vent by the top of the tank instead of through the fill neck where it's supposed to. And we're going to obviously I'm not going to reattach that hose to the fill neck and just kind of have it bouncing around. I'll leave it disconnected for that vent line. But I'm going to scroll out from underneath the truck here and show you those other fittings. Let's see what we got. Yeah, you can see that there. See that green fitting there is where that vent tube would have attached. That goes up to the filler neck. The bottom hose here is the vent line that comes off the vapor canister, and of course the top hose that you see here, this is the fill line that goes, the main fill line that goes to the tank. And another tip on that fill line that goes to the tank, since it's a newer rubber hose, I did put just a little bit of silicone paste on the fitting on the tank so that hose would slide on easier and not cause any other further issues. But with that being done, like I said, this is all reattached. We blew the fuel line out from the fuel rail back to the truck. We did get a little bit of excess fuel out of the line, so that's nice and purged, and the fuel that did come out of that line pretty much smelled like furniture varnish, so that stuff is quite dated. We also got the electrical connector reattached for our vapor canister. If you remember, the one that we inadvertently broke when we dropped the tank, we got that connection done. So we're good as far as electrical. What we're going to do next is pull the fuel rail back off the top of the motor and drain the excess fuel, old fuel, out of it, and then give the injectors see if we can clean the injectors out, and then we'll reassemble everything and check our fuel pressure and go from there. But we'll bring you back in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. So you can see we've got the fuel rail out. I didn't take a video of that because you've seen me do that in the previous videos. And draining the bad gas, or the contaminated gas at this point, I should say, out of it. And we're just going through looking at these injectors, and when we pulled this injector out, hopefully you can see that there. See all that nice crusty crystallized sugar on the top of that injector, and you may be able to see the inside of that injector. Hopefully that focus is okay. But yeah, this one's completely crudded up on the inside. So what I've been doing is going through and taking the other injectors with a little bit of clean gasoline, in this case some True Fuel, which is 4-cycle fuel without ethanol, going through and washing out the tops of these injectors, cleaning the bottoms of them, and then using a little bit of compressed air while the injector is upside down, blowing some air to the top of it just to get any crystals or other contaminants that may be in there. Now, my understanding is, and you'll see that opening there, is that they put a filter right at the top of this injector. I do have to replace one, actually the one you saw in particular, this one right here with all the sugar in it. I'm going to replace that. I'm not going to try to clean it because that looks pretty crammed full of gunk. I'm going to replace it, but what I have at my disposal is a couple of generic ones put out by Standard. And you'll notice that opening is significantly bigger. And Standard has it comes with documentation to explain that difference. In this case, according to the documentation, Standard says they move the filter further down into the mechanism rather than on top. So again, there is a difference on it, but they explain it. It is an aftermarket one. I don't have a new factory injector at my disposal, so we're going to try this and we're going to see how well that works for us. But again, for the remaining injectors, we're dribbling a little clean fuel down in there, hosing out with some compressed air, and then we're also cleaning up the bottoms of them. So we'll give this a shot. If this continues to exhibit what looks to be fuel delivery problems, then what we'll have to do is just replace all the injectors at that point. But we're going to try this first before we get to that. But with that being said, I'll bring it back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So I just want to show you that there. You can see that little bit of like debris there and there inside the below the fuel line where we're rinsing off these injectors. So we did get a fair amount of, looks to be a little bit of crud out of these. And the aftermarket injector, you can see it there. We stuck it in the number 2 cylinder position, so number 2, first cylinder, passenger side. So in case there's an issue with it, we can easily get to it. I'm sorry, it's not that one. That was the other factory one. That is not the number 2 cylinder. That one right there is the number 2 cylinder. So number 2 cylinder, passenger side. Again, we just stuck it up here up front, so it's easy to get to in the event that we have a problem with it. Then that way we can just change out if we need to. So we're going to go ahead and get this fuel rail back on the system. We got our port reaffixed to our adapter so we can put our pressure gauge back on here. Because the first thing we're going to do when we get some fresh fuel in it, we'll key cycle it a few times, verify with our pressure gauge that we're actually getting closer to that 60 psi that we need. Then when we have that, then we'll attempt to start it, and we'll see if this benefited us or not. Even if it doesn't fix the issue, it's something that needed to be done. Obviously, you don't want your fuel pump to stay crammed full of sugar. And also, just to show you this again, you definitely don't want sugar crammed all inside your injectors. With that being said, we'll bring it back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So we got about 7 to 8 gallons of fresh gas in the tank at this point. As you can see, we've cobbled together our collection of fittings again and got our fuel pressure gauge back on here. So we're going to do a fuel pressure test here next. But before we do that, since we had to clean those injectors and replace another one, as you saw earlier, that was crammed full of sugar, I'm going to plug in the scan tool here and just go into the bi-directional tests for the power control module, aka the PCM, and I'm going to do like we did earlier, and I'm just going to cycle through each one of the injectors and just listen for that audible click, the same way we did when we replaced the bad number 5 injector, which wasn't clicking at all. I want to make sure I hear all of them actuate, and then what we'll do is I'll come in, put the fuel pump fuse back in, and then we'll key cycle a couple of times, and I'll bring you back when we do that, just so we can look at our fuel pressure, and hopefully we'll see that we're closer to our 58 plus or minus 2 that we're supposed to have. And if that looks good, barring seeing any fuel leaks from anywhere, then we'll attempt to crank it, and we'll see if our situation's gotten any better, any worse, or stays the same, and then we'll go from there. And I'll bring you back shortly. Thank you much. Bye. Just bringing you back to let you know that we did hear an audible click on all of our fuel injectors. We got our fuel pump fuse in at this point. We've got the key on the ignition. We got our fuel pressure hooked up. Now we did hear the pump prime, but obviously it's only done it once, and that fuel rail and that line's completely empty. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the scan tool to toggle the fuel pump manually, and that way we can watch our pressure build. So let me get you on that. Fuel pump relay on. There we go. I can hear the fuel rail filling. 40, 50, looks like 51 pounds. And we'll go ahead and turn that off. Bleeding down a little bit. We're just going to watch it here. Yeah, that's bleeding down way too fast. We'll see how far that's going to go down. I'll keep it running here. You can see we're already down to 40, looks like 41 pounds. And we're still dropping. That is dropping fast. And since that is a new pump, I seriously doubt that's anything to do with the check ball that's on the inside of it. Although, you know, it could be another bad pump. But we may have another stuck injector that's just feeding wet, that's not closing up, causing us to bleed down. Let's see, 40 pounds and holding. Now you notice the pressure buildup on this one was a lot faster than previous. Okay, looks like it may have slowed down. We're not dropping as fast. We're down to about 38, but we're not plummeting down to 0. So I'm going to toggle the fuel pump on again. $51. We got about 51 again. It's about the same as we were getting with the other pump that was in here, if I remember correctly, around 50-51. Actually, no, we weren't. We were getting low 40s, 38 to 40, so that's an improvement. Still not close to that 58 plus or minus that it's supposed to be, and that could be the gauge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fiddle with this a bit more, and I'm just going to relieve the pressure off the fuel gauge with this. And I'm actually going to, the next test I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this button in while I cycle the fuel pump, because I want to see if the fuel pump can keep up. Now you'll notice this time it's not bleeding off near as fast. Looks like we're now holding pretty steady, about 48 or so pounds. So cool. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to bleed this off, see how fast we build pressure again, and then I'll hold this button in, which is a release for this, and then run the fuel pump and see if it can keep up briefly with the volume. I'm going to do that and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to cycle the pump and turn it on. Actually, it's got pretty good pressure on it. It's going to be, hold on, I got to get this, because I can't hold this and operate the scan tool and do all this at the same time. So we'll keep an eye on the pressure. What I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle the pump on again. See, it's on. I'm going to hit the release on the pressure. You see it, pressure going down. Let it go. And then we're immediately back up to where we started. So that's good.
Do it one more time. Immediately back up. Okay, beautiful. Yeah, it's able to decently recover. Okay, we'll just turn that off. Okay, so we're hitting better. We're hitting about 51 psi according to that gauge, and we're assuming that this gauge is entirely accurate. So let's see. I would like to see more of a 58 range, but we'll go with what we got and see if this does any better. Okay, so we're gonna get prepped here to go ahead and try to start this, and then we'll bring you back. Thank you much. Okay, and welcome back. So unfortunately, we got a storm moving in on us, so I really got to pack things up here, so I'm not able to show you what I wanted to show you. Long story short is that we are getting better fuel pressure now. We're eating about 55, 58 pounds when the engine is running. It's still running like poo, unfortunately. It's still a very rough start, rough idle. It will run if you put your foot on the gas, and it is running extremely rich at this point. You can actually smell it. So we still could have a potential issue with the fuel injectors sticking open. We'll have to do some additional testing on that. I've been looking at some O2 data, and the O2 sensors seem to be doing what they should be doing at this point. So what we're going to do is just continue to look through the data at this point and find the next avenue to go down. So the things that we know are hard start, rough idle. It'll only idle if you put your foot on the gas, and if you keep putting your foot on the gas, you still have a misfire in some of the cylinders, and you can smell it running extremely rich. So I've looked at some of the O2 data. Like I said earlier, that looks fine, so I'm going to continue to look for avenues to go down. It could also potentially be a crappy fuel injector, just based on the fact that earlier we found sugar crammed into one of those injectors through the screen side. So what we may have to do, and I don't know if you've seen that truck there up on the hill, that red 1500 that's been in some of the videos. I haven't done a video on that yet, but that's going to be another project truck. Now it has the exact same motor this one has in it. So in order to eliminate any variables such as injectors, things of that nature, because that engine starts and runs just fine, we could potentially take the entire fuel rail and injectors off of that 5.7, throw it on this 5.7, and just see what that nets us. You know, if we see better running condition, then we know we need to isolate down some more injectors. Obviously, if it continues to run the same, then we know our injectors are fine. So unfortunately, we're going to have to keep pedaling with it as time permits until we can find the next avenue to go down. And when we discover what that is, I'll bring you back. But so far so good. We've got the sugar out of the tank, and we are seeing better fuel pressure. So that's one piece of the puzzle down, and continue to go on from there. Thank you much. Bye.